What's happening, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. We're going over today the post-race review of the CRF250F with the 310 big bore kit from ForceCam. We've got some pros and we've got some cons. We're going to get my buddy Carrie on the line to go over those. You will want to end up hearing these because you guys may want to take a different route as far as your other setup on the bike. Not the 310 kit, but there's a few other things that you may not want to run and a few things you may want to run. So let's get him on the phone. Let's talk about this. We got a third place finish, so this should be some really good insight. Let's give him a shout. All right, y'all, so we've got my buddy Carrie on the line here. We're going to go over a few things with the 310 big bore kit from ForceCam. Some things that he had noticed, some things that he may want to improve on, and where this bike really excelled. So like I mentioned before, we did end up taking home a third place. We added some unforeseen circumstances of a about 2.5 foot mud hole, which we will show the photo right here. Of where he had gotten stuck, but we had some really good results and actually got quite a few compliments on the track. So from some other guys sitting inside the buddy box and all. So I was on the 250X, the Cowie, and then he was racing the 310 big bore kit with the Rally camshaft from ForceCam. And yeah, Carrie, if you wanted to go through as far as from the pretty much, I guess, from the start, that was probably what I would say the start was probably the wildest on that race. That was a good mix of anything from rocks to straight downhill rocks, uphills, sideways uphill with roots and rocks. I mean, it was just an absolute shit show. I think probably the first 3 miles or so.
Yeah, I'd say for the first 3 miles, it was pretty challenging. I mean, right off the gate, you're going into a pretty steep downhill from one ledge to the wooded area, kind of weave in and out of there and take me back out to the sand pit area. And then back into the woods. I mean, not until about mile 5 does it start getting into straighter track and where you can really let loose. Unfortunately, that's about the same time I found that mud pit. Overall, though, as far as the performance of the bike, it did phenomenally. I mean, I was getting out of the corners pretty quick. I mean, I passed quite a few people. I mean, one was on the downhill. He ended up unfortunately wrecking off to the side, but I ended up passing on him and held the lead up until I got to that mud pit, and I was making good traction. But that mud pit slowed me down. I know one of the big things I'm going to be looking into is getting some of those tugger straps for that bike, because it probably would have made a world of difference as far as me being able to get out versus having to wait.
Yeah.
But overall, yeah, no, the performance of the 310, I mean, it put it out there on the table, and I mean, I have no regrets as far as the modifications and big bore kit itself. It delivered where I wanted it to deliver, and I mean, I was thinking about doing a different sprocket size possibly, but I want to get a couple more rides in with the 48 tooth before I start thinking about possibly going up to a higher tooth.
Yeah, that's what I actually was gonna ask as well, because you're running it's pretty odd of a gearing as far as for what some people have done, such as a lot of people will usually go to either run their stock 13 and running a 48 or a 13 and a 50, 1351. And we, of course, downed it with the 310 big bore kit down to a 12-tooth front sprocket. But then in the rear, you're still rocking the 48. Most people usually go up to a 50 or a 51 as far as recommendation. But that 48 really helped you in that long gear ratio on a lot of those straightaways and stuff that you mentioned, mile 5 or so is what you really saw those in.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the sprocket size, going from the 1348 to the 1248, as I stated in the previous video, with the 13 front tooth, it actually had it more on the horsepower side of the spectrum. But moving that 13 to a 12 kind of dropped it back up toward the torque side overall. So, I mean, I'm sitting at about a 4 flat as far as the gear ratio is concerned.
Yeah.
So, and which is still more than stock 250. So as far as the torque range, it's not torque heavy, but it's still on the torque side. But I do like to access the longer gears, and that's what you're going to do with lower ratio.
Yeah, and that was another big thing is as far as the different sections of this track, and you had mentioned in the beginning is it was kind of hell on wheels there for that first. I would say the first mile and a half was about the first mile was pretty technical there. Not super technical, but just real tight. It was just real tight single track, and then a lot of downhill, uphill, and uphill even at slants. But then you went in straight into a sandy area, which was, they had some sand jumps and stuff there. It took you into like a sand track before you re-entered the woods again. And I know that on the 250X, that thing wanted to slide everywhere. But again, I mean, that's also my tire choice as well, that I really wasn't expecting to hit, sand track there. How'd that 310 handle and stuff as far as with the power and all on the sand?
It did great as far as power delivery and everything. I did take a spill on the last turn going out of the sand, but I think that was more to me than the bike. A little bit too much front brake, not enough throttle, so kind of got mixed up in the sand and buried the front tire, which is never what you want to do when you're in a sand rut. But overall, I mean, like I said, the bike's performance was great. My line choices were not the best, but in some of the areas there was a lot of spectators, and I didn't want to get too close to them just because I'm no pro. I'm not trying to turn this thing into a Mustang. So
yeah. Hell yeah. Yeah. Well, and that was actually it was going to bring me up into my next point, which was a big one for some folks that like to ride, more of an enduro style, because this race had it all. And GNCC had already said that, when we did that GNCC for Old Gray, this area just being one of the most technical as far as terrain types out there. And then, of course, coming back over here and then doing this race series that we just did. And we had everything from single track to technical, super rocky sections, river crossings, river jumps, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, if there was a terrain you could ride your dirt bike in, it was there on that track that day. I mean, like you said, we had dry dirt areas that were fun to ride around in and, really blast off in. We had the sandy areas, which made it a little bit more technical. But like you said, as the photo shows, we also had some very muddy, wet areas as well. I mean, it was a good run through. I was happy with the tires' performance as far as the Tusk T35s. Those were doing phenomenal. And as far as wear, things like that, I mean, they're still looking great. No chunks or anything like that missing out of them, especially with all those rocky sections. So I mean, overall the tires held up well.
Yeah, that was going to be what I got to, because it's especially with not having any rain for like 2 weeks just about going out there, and then it was like 96 degrees on that race day. But yeah, the natural springs and stuff running through the mountains and all that stuff down there. Yeah, they definitely had some muddy and wet areas. But how did it do as far as probably, I would say right before you got to that big mud hole area? It was funny because in the footage that I'm sure if you guys watched before that we had released when we were just doing the comparison between the 275, the 310, and then the 250X, we had actually warmed up on a route that had a bunch of rocks, just a ton of rocks. I ended up flaming it out over top of log. But we actually raced through that section this last time, and I remember there being like a river crossing before all those rock beds that when we were there, I was like, yeah, no, glad we didn't come that way. And then we raced straight through it on the actual race and then went to that rock section. How did it do as far as with all those huge freaking boulders, slate rock, and all that stuff? For, like I said, those enduro guys out there that may want the bike for enduro but may worry about, well, I don't want to whiskey throttle it or anything like that, especially for those super rock areas.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as effort involved on the track, I mean, until I hit that treacherous mud pit, I I honestly didn't even notice how hard the race was.
Right.
I mean, the bike was floating through the track well. I mean, that it still handled, just like it did when it was the 250 stock, as far as just overall handling through the single track. So that didn't change. The power delivery on the hills, things of that nature. I mean, it was effortless. I had more time to think about the track than the bike's performance itself, which was great. That was a huge plus. Like I said, had it not been for the mud pit stopping me, I don't think I would have really noticed the hard part on the track.
Yeah, and that's actually awesome that you mentioned that is that focusing more on the actual track itself that you're racing and the terrain that you're facing, looking ahead and all, and not having to worry about like, oh shoot, am I gonna end up breaking, something with the bike or is this thing actually reliable? No, it's extremely reliable. Your temperatures were sitting beautifully, and you guys can track all this stuff,
Yep.
by the way, with the kit, with the Athlon, as far as the full ECU and the app that ForceCam provides with it. So we were able to track all that stuff after the race, and just see, what the peak temperatures were, where it was, where the happy medium RPM ranges that he mostly rode were. And the bike did great. There were no issues whatsoever. So focusing on the actual track was a big thing, because when you did get stuck in that mud, and we were sitting in the buddy box, another just somebody speaking out on noticing how quick that thing is was you had taken off probably about, I would say, maybe 2.5, 3 minutes before this guy did. And then he said he finally had caught you at around like mile 3. But then he said that downhill section, he said you blew by him like he was sitting still around like mile 5. He's like, man, I never saw him after that. He said he was gone. So knew it had to have been somewhere between that, probably about mile 5.5 to about 7. It had to be somewhere in there, because the last up to 8.5 miles of the total track, the last 1.5 miles was pretty accessible as far as I was, I could ride it just to try and see, where you were or anybody else. My son was there.
It was probably around that 5.5 mile mark, because after I got the assistance from the ATV rider getting the bike out of the mud pit, sat there and went up, and I think mile marker 6 was there.
Okay.
Just up that hill. So,
yeah.
But overall, like I said, the bike's performance during the race, I mean, I wasn't worried about it. And with the gearing and the way I have the bike set up, I mean, I have it pretty self-sufficient for the technicality of the single tracks. You're just flipping one gear and managing the clutch as you go. That's why I was able to blow past people in the downhills, because I was in a flow. I wasn't thinking about changing gears or anything like that. All I had to worry about was my clutch and going.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Yeah. Well, and there you go, guys. As far as your reliability and stuff with the 310 kits, the only con really is just figuring out what gearing probably works best. But it's going to take a couple more runs, to get that stuff straight. And then, of course, tugger straps, y'all. This bike is heavy. They are heavy. Mine behind me, I've probably got just as much weight, if not maybe, well, I don't know. You've got a lightweight skid plate on there, and your exhaust doesn't weigh anywhere near what mine does. But it's still heavy as hell. I mean, 265 dry? So you add wet and then everything else that we've got on these things. Yeah, they're heavy, man.
You had wet, and then on top of the suction of the mud pit, and it was that nice soupy mud that just sucked everything back in. So as soon as you went to go pull up on it, it just sunk back down a little bit more.
Yeah, another 40 pounds of mud to help you out there. But
right.
But yeah, other than that, y'all, that's pretty much it. There is your post-race review for the 310. It did absolutely awesome. Kerry was throwing down some damn good time. We ended up, like I said, we sealed 3rd place for the day. We're happy with it. We're going to get back out there. We've got another one that we're going to end up prepping for in November. Probably got a couple before then. Not sure which ones are going to be raced or not, but got another video that's going to be pushing out that's going to be kind of a surprise for somebody in the family. So stay tuned for that one, as well as some more riding footage. But yeah, if you guys got any questions, man, drop them in the comments. All the links are in the descriptions for all the kits, how to contact ForceCam. Huge shout out to those guys. Much appreciation and love. But yeah, we will catch you guys here on the next go round. We'll see y'all.